Welcome to Shifting the Lens, the podcast where we shift our perspective or lens on race and how it plays out at the intersections of our identities. I'm your host, Nikki Hopewell, and on today's episode, we're talking to three young women from Rush who are members of the AAPI community. For the uninitiated, AAPI stands for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and I've invited them to share their perspectives on the rise in anti-racism, break down the myth of the model minority, and learn how we all can be allies. The history of anti-Asian racism in the U.S. is deeply problematic, and I dive into a fuller picture of this history at the start of part 1 of this episode with Dr. Christine Tsai. So we still have much to learn, which is why I've invited my 3 guests on the show. I'd like to introduce Monroe Chen, Modesty Tan, and Victoria Lay to share their personal experiences. Can you please introduce yourself so everyone knows a little bit more about you? Monroe, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monroe Chen. I am a second-year graduate student at Rush University in the Health Systems Management program.
Great, thank you. And Modesty, you're up next.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Modesty Tan. My pronouns are she and her. I'm also a second-year student in the HSM program at Rush. I am, just a little bit more about me, I am a first-generation immigrant. I moved to the United States from the Philippines when I was 11 years old. So yeah, just a little bit about me. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. And Victoria, you're next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Lay, and I am a first-year graduate student at Rush University, also in the Health Systems Management program. And then I guess a little bit more. I am Chinese. I'm I guess technically second generation. My parents were immigrants.
Excellent, thank you. So thank you all again for agreeing to talk with me. I'm looking forward to learning so much from each of you. So let's get into it. You know what, actually, before we start, I'd like to check in with each one of you. Tell me how you're doing. Like, how are you feeling? Because this is, we're having a moment. So, Victoria, let's start with you.
Okay, I guess I have mixed feelings about it. Definitely some fear in there, but not as much fear for myself, but just fear for those around me, especially my family members, like seeing a lot of footage of elderly, Asian people being just attacked for no reason. I think about my grandma who frequently goes out. Especially pre-COVID, but now, still in China, they live in Chinatown. A lot of my family members do. So I think a lot of it is fear, but just, I don't know. I guess I don't really know how to feel, if that's okay.
That's 100% okay. Absolutely.
Yeah. Just like seeing a lot of things in the media, I think it's mixed feelings because I do feel a lot of support from my friends, especially my Asian friends. I think there's a lot of support there. And, but then there's also, a lot of other people like not standing up for Asian people getting attacked, a lot of bystander effect. So I don't know. I feel like there is some support here and there, and just a lot of mixed emotions, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got some support, but you could probably use a little bit more for sure. Monroe, how are you feeling these days?
I have to agree with Victoria. I'm also kind of, I guess, like confused and also have mixed feelings. I guess the most prominent one is also fear, not necessarily for myself, but for my parents and my grandparents as well, because I feel like I am able to stand up for myself and speak for myself a little bit more, but my parents and my grandparents aren't necessarily in that same space. So I've been checking in on them a lot more, but I guess I'm maybe not grateful, but glad that we're having more of these conversations. I think that's the one good thing that's coming out of this situation.
Excellent. I love that. Modesty?
I agree with both Victoria and Monroe. It's a lot of feelings. I'm definitely very overwhelmed, and sometimes it has to go in the back burner, or I'm about to graduate, I have 2 weeks left of school, and I work part-time at Northwestern. So I'm overwhelmed with so much work that sometimes it has to go in the back burner. Like I don't have time to cry about this stuff when I have 3 meetings back to back, you know? So it's a lot. And honestly, when it was first happening, like I've been following the Asian hate crimes for a while now, just on my own. And when it started getting more, I guess like coverage in the news and social media, especially after the shootings in Atlanta, it was like, this is so bad to say, but it was inconvenient, you know, like people are like so aware now and want to talk about it, but at the same time, like this has been happening for a while, and it's almost like we're talking about it now, but I don't necessarily like need to talk about it or want to talk about it. And like now, on top of everything I'm feeling with the pandemic and work and school and just my life in general, I had to have this extra fear and stress, like going out. For example, my boyfriend is African American. And before, my fear was about him going outside and what's going to happen to him, like when he walks the dog by himself. And now it's like, on top of that, it's also me. What happens if I go outside by myself? I'm a woman, so I always get, you know, it's always fearful for me. I get catcalled, you know, someone could just grab me and I can't do anything about that. But on top of this, I'm also Asian. So it's like, it's a lot of emotion, and it's exhausting, to be honest.
Thanks for that, Modesty. And you know what? I'm sorry. This is a lot for you all to be going through. I'm sorry that you have to experience this. So it means a lot that you're willing to come on and just be really fully transparent. It makes me think about, gosh, this is so hard. So when I heard the news of the Atlanta shootings, and I heard that sheriff who said he was just having a bad day, I cannot express or articulate how in my body that felt, but I mean, the only thing I could compare it to is probably like a gut punch. And even though this is not my community, it is my community, right? Because these types of atrocities happen to African Americans too. And so I mean, it was a lot for me to stomach. And hearing that quote, like, I don't want to cause harm when I ask this, but I do want to know, like, what goes through your mind? Because I know as a Black person, I was like, oh, so this is happening to yet another group, with the level of disrespect that we as Black people receive. Like, we're doing this now, right? Like, really? But that's me as an outsider looking in. Like, tell me a little bit about what that was for you, because I was mad. I was enraged. I was like, how dare you? Monroe, I see you nodding your head. How are you? How are you feeling?
It was also conflicting feelings. I was really upset about it because my immediate reaction was, why are we centering the narrative around this one person who's done something horrific and almost trying to provide justification on why he did it rather than focusing on the victims? But at the same time, it was, I didn't know whether or not I was allowed to be upset. It made me question whether or not, like, is this a hate crime? Like, should I be more upset? And am I being too sensitive? So it was just very confusing and kind of like what Modesty said before, just very overwhelming to take in at once.
Yeah, I would imagine. Victoria, I saw you nodding your head too.
Yeah, I was just going off of what Monroe said. I really agree with that. And just that it felt like it really invalidated like our feelings, like, you know, and for the media to portray it like, oh, it wasn't a hate crime. It's not a hate crime. And then it makes you question that too. You're like, am I like overreacting, or like, it's like just all the years of like how the media is always twisting how things are. It just makes you like really feel like, yeah, it just feels invalidated for sure. I think anger was one of them too. Like, how come this man can just be justified and say, oh, he had a bad day? Like, that's okay. He can go and shoot up several places, you know? And why does he get that pass? Like just why, I guess.
Yeah, that's wholly unfair. Like it's unmitigated privilege on fire. Modesty.
Yeah, so when I first heard that term, that phrase, I Googled for hours, like different news sources. And I was like Victoria and Monroe, like I was questioning myself. I'm like, okay, maybe it isn't a hate crime. You know, like I'm looking for definitions of hate crime. Like I'm like, okay, maybe like trying to give the benefit of the doubt. I was like, okay, maybe like I'm jumping to conclusions. Like maybe I need to figure out like if this is actually what I think it is. And it was like I was like making excuses, you know, like, and at the same time, I didn't want to be wrong. You know, if I wanted to stand on this ground, I wanted to have all the facts straight, because many of the times people argue about things that aren't even facts. So I was like fact finding. And then I was like, you know what? Like Monroe said, why are we focused on this and not the fact that, like, not the victims? I knew nothing about the victims. It was just like names, like quickly. Like there was nothing about it. It was all about that phrase, or like what the police said, or what the I don't know what to call him, the perpetrator, I guess, what he did.
Suspect,
But
yeah.
it was like, yeah, I mean, these people are very important, and like, why is it always focused on that person? Like we're shedding more light to that, and it was just like Monroe said, it was a lot, and it was, yeah.
Yeah, like what I think struck me about all three of your responses is that you had to pause, right? Like you had to find justification to be outraged about like, should I even be allowed to feel like that? To me is absolutely unforgivable. Like you should have the freedom to feel however you want to feel, especially if some atrocity is being exacted against your community. You have every right to feel that way. But that does bring me to this whole concept of this model minority, right? Like it's a myth. Like everyone who's listening, please be clear. It is a myth. That is a statement of fact. It is non-negotiable. It's a myth. But it's tricky, right? Because it's this label created by white privileged folks that does an extensive amount of harm. First, it pits like the AAPI community against like all other BIPOC folks, like especially Black folks, right? Because it basically says like, look at this community, they work hard and look at what they've achieved. And if they can do it, so can you. Which literally blatantly ignores like the role that racism plays in other bi folks' ability to like make progress, like, right? And it also creates this highly unrealistic, superhuman expectation that is virtually impossible to sustain, right? Like, what is that? So tell me a little bit about like how you do or don't fit into this model minority myth. Modesty, let's start with you.
Sure. So I agree with everything you said, Nikki, that this is something that's completely made up by American society, right? Like I didn't know about this term until college, and I often have to Google to make sure I completely understand what it is. Like if you ask my mom, who moved here as well with me, what this is, she would have no idea, right? Like this is something created in this country, in this society, like you said, to pit us against each other. This kind of reminds me of that. I don't know if you've ever heard of the economy based on cookies analogy, where the rich people, so we have this like piece of cookie, the rich people take half of it, right? And then the other half, they split it amongst the poor people. And then the poor people fight amongst each other, like, well, you have more than I do, and you have more than I do, when like the rich people have an entire half of the cookie. And it's kind of like that. Like the white privileged people have that big chunk of the cookie, and they have us fighting over these little crumbs. And that's what it kind of reminds me of. And in terms of just like going back to your question of asking, like, how do I fit into this? If you look at me and you say, someone could say, look at her Modesty. She's an immigrant. She moved here when she was 11. She had all these barriers. She's a woman. But yet she is in a master's program and she has this job and she secured this job or whatever. And like you could compare me to like my boyfriend or something and be like, well, why didn't you do all these things? Like, you've been here for so long, you've been here in the United States, like you're just being lazy because you're Black or whatever. Right. And like, but that's not true, because a lot of the things that like a lot of the reasons I'm here, yeah, is because of hard work, but also I don't have to go through the same things as him as a Black man have to go through, you know. And I feel like sometimes there's a lot of positive assumptions that people make of me because of what I look like and where I came from that could help me like move forward compared to, you know, my boyfriend as a Black man.
Right.
So, right, like you said, it's a myth. I hope that answers the question.
No, 100%. Monroe, I saw you like, especially at the cookie analogy, which was genius. That's perfect. I've never heard that before, but it explains it perfectly well. Monroe, what are your thoughts? How do you feel that you do or don't fit into this model minority myth?
I'll say that for a good portion of my life, I guess I knew what that was, but I kind of played off of it because it benefited me at the time. And it was only recently that I learned the downfalls of that. When I saw the question yesterday, I was reflecting. I was like, how do I fit in? And I realized that in my professional life, so at school and at work, I kind of fit that myth to a T. Like, I'm pretty quiet. I don't really like to speak in front of the class. Doing this podcast is like a whole new world for me. But like, I'm obedient. I'm really good at like the analytic stuff. But if you see me in my personal life, and I'm sure Modesty and Victoria can attest to this, I'm really loud. Like, I'm very opinionated. I'm brutally honest. I really don't care what other people think of me and if they like me or not. And it made me wonder why I behave that way. And I think it's because I feel like if I really truly showed my personality in the professional sense, that I wouldn't be accepted and I wouldn't be able to excel or progress in my career where I am. And I think that that is very sad to kind of realize.
Wow, that is that's tough. Okay, Victoria, you're up, my friend.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I guess initially when we were, sorry to go back, but when we were talking about the previous question, it did make me think kind of about this model minority myth and that feeling of feeling invalidation again. I think that model minority makes people think that Asian Americans have it easier in some sense, but I think that it's often forgotten that, you know, like Modesty was an immigrant. She came here to a country she didn't know anyone, or maybe you didn't, you know what I mean? But like, you had to really work hard as well. And same with like, I know firsthand, like my parents, they came to a country where they didn't know anyone. They didn't know the language, and they had to build our family from the ground up. And I think that model minority myth kind of makes people just like not remember that we have struggles too. And I think, yeah, we might have it a little bit easier, as Modesty said, like people look at us and then look at a different minority and make more positive assumptions about us. So in that sense, I do think there is validity to that part, but there's still a lot of struggles. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes as well. But I guess like for myself personally, I don't know. I think I would say I'm a pretty loud person too. I'm not sure. I would say I don't know. I think I read that question. I was struggling with it too. I don't know where I land in that sense.
No,
I don't know. Sorry.
No. That no need for apology. No, that it's hard. I can't imagine. I don't know how I would answer that question if I were asked a similar one. So I get it. And I think you all navigated it perfectly fine. And it's so funny because, you know, there's so many layers to this model minority myth. I think what else makes it tricky is that it puts the AAPI community closer in proximity to whiteness, but yet it still makes them vulnerable to like receiving racism. Like there's no way to win, right? Like you're propped up as one thing, but yet you're still like vulnerable. Like how do you, that's hard to navigate. It really is. And you've all expressed that. I wanted to talk about something, and I didn't think about this question ahead of time. So brace yourselves, but I feel like you can answer it. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how Asian women are often fetishized, right? Or there's a so-called dragon lady image, or like how, and I know this has to come up for you, but and if it does, like how do you combat this, or how do you like how do you navigate that, right? Because there's, I mean, as a black woman, I'm supposed to be angry all the time. I'm supposed to be loud. I'm supposed to be a welfare queen, right? Like there's a whole bunch of assumptions that people put on me before any words come out of my mouth. And that's hard for me to navigate. So how do you navigate the stereotypes as women, especially? Um, Modesty, you look like you're ready. Monroe looks like she's thinking. So I'll start with you, Modesty.
Yeah, I can go ahead. Yeah, so I think it's funny, but like not funny, haha. It's just like ironic because that's one of the things about the model minority thing too, is like people lump Asians all together when we are all so different. We come from so many different countries, different cultures. Like I'm a little bit like part Chinese, but like my Filipino culture is very different from Chinese culture. And like people, like you said, like people stereotype Asian women to be, submissive and quiet. And that's like how they fetish fetishize us.
Hard word.
Yeah, because of that. And then they meet me and they're like, oh, she's really loud and she's very like aggressive and like stands up for herself. And like, why is she like this? She's Asian, And I feel like when you compare me to other Filipino women, I look more like Chinese. So people assume usually I'm Chinese. But I grew up in a completely different culture, like my family is full of really strong, independent women. And I've always known to always stand up for myself. I will never, I will never back down if someone has wronged me. And men are so unbelievably surprised by that, especially when I get catcalled outside and I do something about it. And it's funny because they're so shocked to the point of anger. And it actually makes it more dangerous for me. If I could just talk about a quick scenario, this happened to me a couple weeks ago. I was at a Filipino store, grocery store, and I was in line, and I had asked this couple to kind of step back and like step on the, social distancing sticker because they were very, very close to me.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy blew up, and he wasn't, I don't remember his race, but he wasn't Asian. And he was just like going off, like just saying all these things to his wife to purposely like antagonize me so I could hear. And I think that he thought I was just going to accept it and let him run with it. And he didn't realize I was going to keep turning around and stand up for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And he was shocked to where he just kept getting angry and angry and angry to where he started pulling in violence to it. At one point, he told his wife, like, I want you to slap the out of her. And
oh my gosh, Modesty.
Yeah, because I had asked them to step back from behind me. And I turned around and I was like, excuse me? And he was just like shocked that I even like said something. And it just kept going like that. So it's really dangerous for I feel like Asian women and the way we're fetishized because these assumptions, it's dangerous either way, right? Like if I was submissive and if I wasn't like speaking for myself, then people think that they can just take advantage of me. So
Right.
It's a double-edged sword. Yeah.
Wow. It's almost like, how dare you defy the stereotype? Oof.
Right.
Okay, Victoria, come on with it. I see you.
No, I'm so sorry that happened to you, Modesty. And I remember like reading that when you shared it, I think either on Facebook or Instagram, maybe both. But I think you're exactly right. Like they, I don't know, the society wants to paint us to be these submissive woman. And I think it kind of reminds me of like 90 Day Fiance, if anyone watches that. There's a lot of, American men who will pay money and will fly out to these I guess like third world countries like the Philippines, and they purposely find quiet women, women that they can control, and then bring them in America and then be like, you need to be grateful that I gave you this life. And I think that happens a lot. and kind of goes back to that Asian fetish thing. And it kind of also reminds me that like sometimes like when I go out, people will come up to me and be like, what are you, as a pickup line, and think that that's like something that I want to hear or like want to. And I remember I'm just like, either I'm like, why does that matter? Like that doesn't have to be, I don't know. I think that's really frustrating too in that sense. But I'm not sure I answered your question.
100%. You answered it. Don't worry about it. You got it. Thank you for that. And yeah, modesty, you know what? I agree with Victoria. Like that's inappropriate and offensive. And I'm sorry that happened to you. That the level of disrespect that people have. And it's interesting to me because I feel like if you were to say those very same things to them, they would be like, what? But expect you to, just to sit and take it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
that's so frustrating. Monroe.
Yeah, when Modesty told me that story, I was so just upset and angry for her. I was like shaking along with her because I had to wonder if it was a male or someone of a different race that made that same request. Like, would he have reacted in the same way? Like, did he just think that Modesty was going to take it because she was on her own and vulnerable? But anyways, for I guess navigating that stereotype, I'm not sure that I know how to navigate it. I feel like whenever I get approached with those types of questions, like, oh, where are you from, but where are you really from, or like your English is so good, I kind of just remove myself from the situation. Like I don't really bother giving a response, and I kind of just leave because I don't know what to do in that scenario.
That's fair. Yeah, no, it's not like you have a resource book or a handbook that helps guide you in those instances. So I can appreciate that for sure. So you all, especially you, Masi, talking about your experiences, like it makes me think of like what do you need, or what would you like in the way of support from like your peers, your friends, your professors, like colleagues, bystanders? Like, what do you need, right? Like what in those moments, what's important for you? What would just make you feel supported? Victoria, let's start with you.
I definitely think if it's, bystanders just standing up when you see any type of, injustice or violence or anything, or even if it's among friends, I think sometimes my friends have said things to me that I think at the time I was too afraid to stand up for myself. And I think just like having someone, if there's someone else saying like, hey, like, that's not okay, like don't say that to them, like that, I would have really appreciated that. And I also think just having friends reach out after RJC did their town hall. A good friend of mine from the program reached out to me, and I think that I was like, that was it. I just wanted to know that you're here for me and that you're willing to learn. And I think that's honestly enough for me. But sorry, one more thing. In terms of, I think maybe like professors or something, Modesty and I are actually in a class together. And I think it's a diversity class, and we were hoping that it was a current topic and that would be addressed in that sense. Hearing faculty saying that I understand that you guys are going through something right now. I don't think that was ever talked about, and we're just expected to carry on with our school, our internship, our extracurriculars, and just keep going on as if, this isn't happening right now.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Monroe, how are you feeling up there?
I have to agree with everything that Victoria said. I feel like just having someone reach out and check in means a lot. But I also feel like I think it'd be really nice if everyone took the time to kind of reflect on their own implicit bias in terms of like when you're having a conversation, like why do you find a certain joke about a minority funny? Like, is that okay? Do we need to kind of reassess like it? Like, I think is the hard part, is when you have to question yourself and realize that maybe there's something about your own behavior that needs to kind of be altered in order for things to be better for everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does for sure. Thank you for that, Monroe. Modesty?
Yeah, I agree with everything Monroe and Victoria said. I think I mentioned this the other day when we had a town hall around the same topic, how, you know, there's a lot of performative allyship out there where people, share these things so that, people think they're standing in solidarity with us. And, I appreciate the awareness, but if you're going to say you're going to do something, or if you're going to urge people to reach out to family and friends or educate themselves, make sure you do it. Don't, if you're not going to do it, if you're not going to take the time to do it, I'd appreciate if you wouldn't advertise that you're going to, because then we see these things and then we're expecting something and we don't get that. And it makes me think like, am I less of a person because they didn't reach out to me? Or am I less of a person because they didn't check on me? Do they think that it doesn't affect me the same way? Am I not Asian enough in this scenario? Like
Right.
what is going on there? And I think one of the things that was mentioned in the town hall as well is that people have this fear, right? Like when they reach out to people, like what if it triggers this person, or what if like they don't want to talk about it? And I've had people like respond to me and be like, hey, why are you reaching out to me right now? And people are so fearful of the consequences to themselves. And I think that's just part of it. Like you need to put the other people in front of yourself. If you're just like, if most the highest consequence you can get for reaching out to one of us is probably like, oh, I don't want to talk about it, or like maybe we'll get angry for you reaching out, but that's it, and then you get to move on with your life. For us, if someone doesn't reach out to us, it's a lot more detrimental, right? Like we don't feel support, and it causes us to go into this like depression, or like we overthink, and there's so many more consequences for the person on the other side. So I think really in terms of support, I would urge people to just try to put other people before themselves. I mean, it's really simple, but it's hard at the same time. So yeah, just that.
Thank you for that. I think people, this is fascinating to me. I think people struggle with empathy. Like, at the end of the day, we're all simply human beings, right? Trying to figure out how to connect. But if you think about it, like it's easiest from that perspective. We have 1,000,000,000 intersectionalities, right? Like gender and religion and just name something, right? Orientation, whatever, a gender identity. But like at the end of the day, we're just people. Like, why can't we connect on that level? Not even worrying about how you're going to feel or how you may be affected, but like, are you okay? Like, and ask it in a way that's really empathetic. Like, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm just checking in on you. I'm not sure what you need, but I'm here and I'm here to listen. And how are you? What can I do to support you? Even something as simple as that goes a long way. Something that you all mentioned, which I think is interesting, is like I'm thinking about the D&I conversation, especially that inclusion piece. And I feel like you all feel like you've been left out of the conversation to some extent, right? Like, how included do you all feel in that D&I equation? Because for me, like I'm a communication strategist, so and DE&I is my lane. So when I think of that phrase, I think of literally everybody, like older adults, LGBTQ plus, veterans, individuals with disabilities, like the whole gamut. But I can see that there may be times when you, as members of the AAPI community, feel like I'm not even allowed to be here. Like, is that how you feel? I just want to get a sense. Monroe, I'll start with you.
I guess I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm being excluded from the conversation, but it feels like kind of like the point that you touched on before, that proximity to whiteness. It almost feels like I don't deserve to complain about certain things because we're kind of always praised for the positive aspects of our stereotype. So I think that's so ingrained in me that I feel like I should be grateful for whatever opportunity that I have, and I should be grateful to be even offered to like join the table, even though I might not have a seat there. And I think that's kind of the difficult space to operate in. And I feel like that sense of alienation is true for at least me in like this aspect, but also even within just like the Asian community in terms of like Asian American versus Asian, like someone who immigrated to the US, like their home base is always their homeland, wherever they were once in Asia. Whereas like Asian American, I feel like we're foreign to both Americans because we're too Asian, but we're also foreign to our Asian countries because we're too American. So we're kind of just stuck in that own island on our own. And I'm not sure if that kind of deviated away from your original question too much, but
No. I think that's no, not at all. I mean, I have a friend who is part Korean and part Japanese, and she said to me, she's like, I feel like I'm in no man's land sometimes because, if I go back home to Korea, I'm too American, right? And if I'm here, I'm too. She's like, there's no way to win. And I was like, you're going to have to start creating space for yourself, right? Because unfortunately, no one's going to make space for you. Like, people are always looking for places where they fit. And I'm learning even as a Black woman, like I just have to take up space and be okay with it. And I think that's kind of what we all are starting to have to do as well. Victoria, I'll go to you next.
I just want to say what Monroe said. I think it was like very well said and very eloquent. And I agree 100% with what you said. I feel like we've also been taught by our families, like we should just be grateful to have a shelter. I mean, to have like the opportunity to get an education, like for us to all be in master's programs, they're like, just be grateful. But I think that has like kind of twisted the way that we view like the way we view ourselves and where we belong as well. But one more thing I want to add was it kind of your question made me think of the scholarship that my friend had recently told me she wanted to apply for, and it was meant for minorities only. However, when she went to apply, she found that Asians weren't included in that category of minorities, and she therefore wasn't eligible for that. And I believe that happened to my sister as well. And that kind of made me say, like, why aren't we included? We are a minority in this country as well. And I think that just goes to show where we stand in the eyes in America. So
it's really interesting. It makes me think about the AAPI community and Black people have a lot in common in that we have like dual consciousness. I mean, we have a lot in common anyway. I think more than we even realize. We need to get better about that. But, it makes me think about like as a Black person having to walk into a room and code switch, right? Like, because you want to make sure that you can operate in that space safely and have them see you the way they need to see you, but not necessarily the way you are. And it's difficult to navigate because you just want to show up and be your authentic self and feel like that's okay, but you're always like on guard, right? Like, I don't know if I can really do this because it's not going to be acceptable. And that's terrible that that person was not considered that category. I don't like the word minority because no one is less than, right? We're all absolutely great. But they weren't considered, a person in the margins. Like that to me just feels ridiculous. And again, another mark, a reflection of that model minority myth, right? Like you just can't catch a break. I'm sorry, Modesty, I'm going to go to you next.
No worries. Yeah, so I also agree with Monroe and Victoria. It kind of reminded me of this point I wanted to make when I was thinking about this conversation, how what I've come to realize is that Asians are always outsiders. Like no matter what, no matter how many years like someone's parents have lived here, how many years they've lived here themselves, they're always outsiders. And that's what people don't understand about these like microaggressions, like where are you from? Well, where are you really from? And some people, I remember another person had asked me this question and like, why is that offensive to you? Because when someone asks me about my background, I say like, oh, I'm Polish. And like, I'm so proud of that. And I was thinking, like, it's not that I'm not proud that I'm from the Philippines or I'm Filipino. It's the fact that we're always seen as outsiders. Like, we're always seen as people who don't belong here. And that's what we're seeing in anti-Asian hate crimes today, right? Like, it's always that kind of rhetoric that you don't belong here, like, go back to your country, when it's like, this is my country. Like, I belong here as much as you do, you know? We're always outsiders no matter what. And it's like, it's so difficult to navigate. Like, there's nothing you could possibly do about that. Like, it doesn't matter if you were born here. Like, that is the stereotype that's been like assigned to us, that this isn't our place. We're always immigrants no matter what. Yeah. I don't remember if I answered your question.
No, that's fine. So you also added to another layer of complexity, right? Like, there's the racist component to it, but then like there's the xenophobia. Like, okay, you're a foreigner, like like, again, you still can't win. And you have to deal with all of it. Like, it is very hard to navigate. And I want to ask you all, because this struck me while you were all talking, because this is a lot to deal with. How is your mental health? And how do you support your own mental health? Because this is a space where I feel like there's not a whole lot of opportunities to feel like you can get the true support that you need, right? Monroe's laughing, right? Like, what does that look like? This is taxing, right? This is emotionally taxing. And it's not just like this week or last week's events that make it taxing. This is like taxing all the way around. Like, you have a myth to maintain that you never asked for, right? You're not welcome here because you're a so-called foreigner or an immigrant, right? Like, you're supposed to maintain this standard of perfection that nobody asked for. Tell me, like, how are y'all doing? Like, mental health wise, I need to know. I'm concerned. Victoria?
Well, what I will say is that I'm not very good with my emotions or kind of like addressing how I feel. I'm a very like shove it under the rug and, get what I need to do, what I like work wise or whatever, and just my emotions on the back burner for sure. I think like this helps for sure, just having, people to talk to, just an opportunity to like say how I feel, and then to hear that like my peers and my friends, like they feel the same way and that I'm not alone in this. And I think that, is a positive step in the right direction. So I'm okay. At least I think I'm okay. And it helps to have that support system for sure.
Okay, good. Monroe?
I'm the same as Victoria. I don't like dealing with my emotions a lot, and I kind of just shove them away and get what I need to get done. And then if I want to circle back to them later, I will. But usually, I try to avoid them because it's very overwhelming sometimes. I think with recent events, I've honestly tried my best to ignore it when I can, because I just find that that's kind of the best way to get through my day and get what I need to get done. But yeah, I think that being a student and also working at the same time doesn't really help. So it's pretty exhausting, but we're also very close to graduation. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yay, that's great. And Modesty, how about you?
I agree with Victoria and Monroe. It's definitely not healthy. I'm very much like in touch with my feelings and emotions, but like they said, right now, I very much like, I don't have time for this. I don't really have time to think about what's going on with me. And that's kind of why I mentioned earlier, when all like the shootings happened and everyone was like so like ready to fight for, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And I was kind of just like, ignore. You don't have time for this. You're so busy. I don't have time to address my feelings right now. And then another thing I want to address too is probably similar to the African American community, Nikki. Like, mental health isn't something that like is really addressed in our culture. Like,
right.
Growing up, right? Like, I had to beg my parents essentially. I mean, they're great parents, but like I had to kind of justify why I needed help paying for like a therapy session or something like that. You know, it's kind of like, you're in America, like you could have been in a third world country, but you're in America now. Like, you know, everything is great. Like, it's so much, like, look at your family at home. Like, your life is so much better than theirs. Like, you just need to kind of like suck it up and be grateful, like stop complaining, you know? So it's like we've mentioned many times, like, I don't really have room to complain or be sad. But I mean, I have gotten over that, and I have grown, luckily, to understand that I do have, you know, the right to be sad and have these emotions. And then, but then going back to like resources, I don't have it. It's been really difficult for me to find a therapist. And what I realize is because there's like, we're not represented very well in that space. So it's like, no one I talk to, unless they're in the same position, like Asian American at least, it doesn't even have to be like an immigrant, they're never going to understand fully what I'm going through. So how are they going to help me if they can't fully understand? So it's like, I keep hitting these walls. But what I will say, I'm grateful to have Victoria and Monroe. Like, they have, you know, been really, really, really helpful in this area. I mean, I reach out to them all the time. And just to be honest, Monroe has been my rock through this whole thing. We're going through the exact same thing with graduation and the exact same emotions. To like, I can joke about it with her to make us feel better. We check on each other and make sure, like, hey, you're doing okay, right? Like, is there something we need to do for each other to make sure we get through this? So having a support system is really great. And I hope anybody who's listening out there, if you don't have one, you know, reach out if you can. Like, if you find my information, and I'll make sure, you know, to be there for you. And yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. I hope you all know that you have an ally in me, and I'm happy to hold space for you at any time. So please know that that is an open invitation and ongoing. It's interesting to hear how having access to mental health is a privilege, right? Like, Black people, Modesty, to your point, you know, members of the AAPI community, it's not like, you know, going to a therapist is a thing that we do. We don't talk about this stuff. We just, you know, you gut it up and you just push through it, right? Which causes more harm, right? We need some tools, right? We need some tools so that we can get through this stuff. But one of the tools is definitely having a friend support system. So I'm glad that you all have a solid friendship. And again, I'll extend mine to you as well. So I'm so grateful for this conversation. I've learned a tremendous amount. Nurse did as well. I hope this reminds us all that allyship is really critical and important right now. And it's about really stepping up and showing support, actually doing the work. I hope you'll do the work. I know I'm definitely going to step up my own game. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Shifting the Lens. Until next time, I hope this inspired you to find ways to sharpen your focus on what's really important, broaden your perspective, and build up that empathy muscle.